Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're taking a look today at the new Apple Mac Mini, and this one is the entry-level version. I went with the base configuration here to see what the least amount of money gets you, and I have to say, this is probably one of the more value-packed Apple products that I've reviewed in quite some time. And I say that because the M4 processor is very capable, as you'll see as we work our way through the review. And they also now put 16 gigabytes of RAM in the base model, so it can do a lot more than the base models of prior Mac Minis could do. So you get a lot more value for the money here. In fact, this Apple product is now competitive with many of these low-cost but high-performing mini PCs we look at here on the channel quite frequently. I just got this one in the other day that we'll be looking at next week. So I am quite impressed, and you will see what this little mini PC can do here in just a second, but I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that I paid for this with my own funds. All the opinions you're about to hear are my own. No one is paying for this review, nor has anyone reviewed or approved what you're about to see before it was uploaded. So let's get into it now and see what the new Mac Mini is all about. Now, the price point on the base model here is $599. Again, 16 gigs of RAM, the M4 chip, and 256 gigabytes of storage. The price does escalate up quite quickly when you go beyond the base model here. So for example, this same computer with 512 gigabytes of storage is $799. Now this has the regular M4 processor on board. I think this is more than adequate for most consumer use cases, including people that are doing some moderate video editing. If you're going into more high-end professional work or doing things that are much more demanding on the processor, like AI and very advanced color grading inside of a video or something, that's where the M4 Pro version might be worth taking a look at. But I think for most consumer use cases, you're going to be more than happy with the regular M4. It is a very capable processor, and again, very nice to see that 16 gigs of RAM is the default now on the Mac Mini. As you can see here, it's a much smaller device than prior editions. It is larger than the Apple TV, which it kind of looks like. So it is going to take up a little bit of room on your desk, but not all that much. There is no VESA mount, though, for mounting it on the back of a monitor, so you may need to get some third-party accessory for that. Oddly, they put the power button here at the bottom. I guess they intend for you not to turn it off all that often, so you're not turning it back on all that frequently. But you do have to actually lift the computer up to hit the button to turn it on. So that's the only design issue that I've got here to gripe about. But beyond that, I think it's a very elegant piece of hardware. On the front, you have two USB Type-C ports. These are 10 gigabit per second each. And you can get things like this USB hub here that can give you regular USB-A ports if you need that. You also have a headphone jack here on the front. When I flip it around to the back here, you'll see more ports. What's nice about this is that the power supply is integrated into the unit. I watched some really fun teardown videos last night of how they designed that power supply. It's really cool. Very flat and right on the bottom of the unit here. And so you just have a nice cloth power cable that it comes with for plugging it into power. There's no separate brick here, which is quite elegant, I think, given the small form factor of the machine. This is a gigabit Ethernet port, but they do have an option for a 10 gig port if you need a faster Ethernet connection. It also has Wi-Fi 6E on board. This is an HDMI output, and then you can get two additional displays output through the Thunderbolt ports here on the back for a total of 3. And all of those displays can support 4K video. Now, on this model, the M4 version, these Thunderbolt ports are Thunderbolt 4. On the M4 Pro version, these are Thunderbolt 5 ports, but you do have a good number of ports here that you can work with. They are full service in that they can do video out along with data devices. And if you have USB 4 or Thunderbolt devices, plug them in back here, because these ports are much faster than the ones that are in the front of the unit. One thing to note here with the Mac Minis is that they don't currently support external GPUs through the Thunderbolt, but there are a number of other Thunderbolt devices that do work, including faster storage and that sort of thing. So why don't we get this thing plugged in now, and let's see how it performs. We're actually going to start with what you get with a Mac, and I did a live stream the other day as I was setting this up, and a lot of people were writing in saying, hey, I'm thinking about buying a Mac for the first time in years. What does it come with on the software side? Well, let's take a look and see what you get when you buy yourself a Mac. So here we are on the Mac desktop. We're running at a 4K 60 resolution. One of the things you're going to notice here is that I'm using this ThinkPad keyboard thing because you don't actually get a keyboard and mouse with the computer. All you get is the computer and the power cord. You don't even get an HDMI cable. So we'll need to dig up a keyboard or buy one to work with this. And of course, you'll need a display as well. So let me show you first what you get with the Mac, because they do pack in a lot of great software for free. You do, of course, get some great photo organizing software here through Apple Photos. This will link up with your Apple iCloud account. So I have a lot of photos in my library from my iPhone, so all of those photos will show up here. I can do all of the editing and all the other things that you would expect from a modern photo application. You also get a great video editor here called iMovie, and they have a bunch of templates you can start with, like this one here, or you can start a project from scratch and make yourself a nice beginning video edit. It's not as robust as Final Cut Pro, which is their professional video editor that you have to buy separately. But I think for a lot of consumer use cases here, iMovie is fantastic, and you will have a lot of fun editing family videos or starting off your YouTube career on there. Now in a minute I will show you some video editing with a 4K 60 frames per second video project in Final Cut Pro, so stay tuned for that in a minute or two here. Another thing I really like about the Mac is that they've got some great productivity software built right in. So there's a triumvirate here called iWork, which includes Keynote, which is a spectacular presentation software package. I've been using this for the better part of 20 years. This was originally designed for Steve Jobs to make his presentations at those big Apple events. And although it looks a lot like PowerPoint, it performs better. The visuals look better, things look more polished and professional. They've got some great animation tools built in that allow you to do some really cool stuff without a lot of tinkering. I did a video about Keynote a couple of years ago that I'll link in the video description, because I think it is probably the best way to make presentations, and people notice the difference when you're using Keynote versus something else. So that's one of my go-to apps and has been for some time. In fact, Keynote is why I switched to the Mac a number of years ago. They also have Numbers here, which is a spreadsheet application. This is compatible with Excel. It'll load the files in and export back out to Excel. But when you save the file, it saves it as a numbers file. So you do have to go through the extra step of exporting to Excel if you want to share it with non-Apple people. There's also a great word processor here called Pages. And this is not only a word processor, but also a really handy layout tool. So for example, they've got a bunch of really nice templates that you can change very easily. So for example, I can just drop this photo in and change that around. I can jump over to this other page here and move some things around. And this gives you a good sense as to just how responsive this hardware is, even at 4K, for doing this kind of work. You're not going to see any lag or slowdown here, even buying the least expensive versions. So lots of good software here. Now, Apple also has their own web browser called Safari, and it performs quite well in this hardware, as you would expect. So as you can see, it just springs up almost immediately here. Websites don't take that much time to render in at all. I do have a gigabit internet connection here, so that's going to contribute to that a bit. But overall, the speed here of browsing is quite nice. The web browser is not loaded up with bloatware like you might find on the Microsoft Edge browser. And there's other browsers that you can download, of course, as well. So my personal favorite right now is the Brave browser, and this one has an ad blocker integrated. They do have a version of the Brave browser, which is the one I'm running here, that is optimized for Apple Silicon, but it's based on the Chrome code base. So you get all the advantages of Chrome and their extension ecosystem without seeing ads and having all of your information leak out everywhere. So all in, there's a lot of good options for software on the Mac platform. There's a lot of open source applications that run on the Mac as well, because it is a Unix system at its core. So there is a lot to choose from here with exceptional performance given the price point. Now, a little earlier, I took a look at a YouTube video running at 4K at 60 frames per second. The Mac Mini was able to run that video without any drop frames after it got started and played everything back very smoothly. So for media playback, whether it's YouTube or Netflix or some of the other streaming services out there, I think things will be perfectly fine on here, as they are on similar mini PCs running Windows. One thing, though, is that I don't recommend the Mac Mini as a home theater device. I don't recommend Windows computers for that much these days either, primarily because a lot of higher-end video now is using Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos, and these devices don't do all that well of getting your TV into the right mode and supporting those HDR formats. So an Apple TV or an NVIDIA Shield TV, I think, is still the better option for playing back media on a television. But you can plug these into a TV just fine using that HDMI output. And on version 3.0 of the Browserbench.org speedometer benchmark test running on the Brave browser, I got a score of 42.9. That is actually the highest score I have ever recorded. And I suspect the reason why the score is so high is that Apple has optimized their processors year over year to perform very well at the things most people do with their computers. And of course, web browsing is one of those things. So that is why I think we're seeing such a great score on that benchmark test. Let's take a look now at some video editing. All right, so let's take a look at a 4K 60 frames per second video project. This is an actual video that appeared on my channel a few months ago of the solar eclipse, and this was shot up at my brother's maple syrup farm. Most of the clips in here are 4K 60. That's what I outputted the project file at. And unfortunately, the YouTube algorithm did not deliver this video to most of my subscribers. They didn't even see the thumbnail, let alone watch the video. So I will put this in the video description so you can check it out. Now, one thing I did here is I deleted all of the render files, and I also turned off the automatic background rendering. So all of the effects here, like this time lapse, are being executed here in real time. And I also have the higher quality video preview set up here. So we're not working with proxy clips, we're working with the original compressed footage that came off of my GoPro, off of my iPhone, and also another smartphone here. And it's mixing all these different format types together in real time. We're not seeing any lag or slowdown here. You will see a cross dissolve here execute in real time without any delay, along with one of those Ken Burns zooms going on. And all in, I can't find any reason to upgrade to something more advanced here for doing this type of video work, because everything here is just running so smoothly. I'm going to jump in here and just add a transition. So maybe we'll do a Gaussian blur one here. We'll just drop that in the middle there. We do have to retrim the clip here to do it, but if I go ahead and play this back now, what you will see as we transition from one clip to the other is really no lag at all. I can jump over to the end of this clip and maybe do a similar transition here. So we had a cross dissolve before, but maybe we want to do something a little more stylized. So I'll just drop that in its place there and we'll run it again. And again, you can see the system, even at its base configuration, not even blinking here in doing a lot of this type of work. So altogether, I've been very impressed with how this has been working. I can jump in real time here and adjust some of the color here if I want, and adjust things along the way, and it will just render it out in real time as we play back here. So it's a very good editing experience. Again, you'll have a better editing experience on the higher end M4 chip if you need that kind of thing, but for the type of work that I do, this is more than adequate, even with a 4K 60 video file. So I'm impressed, and this is a very good value for its price point. Now here's another fun experiment using an application called GPT for All. I covered this a few months ago. What we've got running on here is a local large language model. Think ChatGPT, but not running on a server. It's running on your Mac Mini. And I've asked it to write a story about a YouTuber frustrated over the algorithm not delivering his video to subscribers. And if I hit enter here, you can see just how quickly that text begins spitting out. And if you've ever experienced running this on lower end hardware, you can get a feel for just how much performance we've got on this for AI types of tasks that execute locally. This is far better than what Apple provides for you right now with Apple Intelligence. And you've got the ability here with this hardware to do some really fun AI work locally. Now, of course, the Mac Mini is a Mac. It does not run Windows software natively. So to do that, you need to install an application like UTM here. Right now, I've got it running Ubuntu, so I can actually run Linux applications on here inside of their own window, and it performs quite nicely. This is the ARM version of Ubuntu that is running here. And I can also jump back over to my UTM application and boot up a version of Windows. Now, virtualization does require a lot of system memory, so this is where having a little more RAM on your Mac might be helpful. But it is possible to, as you see here, load up Ubuntu Linux or other versions of Linux as well, along with getting Windows 11 running here too. This version of Windows 11 is the ARM-based version of Windows, so this will perform very similarly to many of the Copilot Plus PCs that we see out on the market now running with Snapdragon processors. Those two are running the ARM64 version of Windows, but I found compatibility to be very good. For a long while, the best way to run ARM Windows was to run it on a Mac in virtualization, and the experience here is very similar. And one of the things that I like about UTM is that they give you some really easy ways to get started with the platforms that you might want to run. So if you go onto their website, they've got a great gallery of operating systems that will give you pre-configured images that you can just boot up and get working with very quickly. But you can also dig in and set up things manually as well. It's basically a wrapper for the open source QEMU project. But it's great here just to be able to load up Linux on demand or load up Windows 11 on demand. And again, we're still running with the base level hardware here. Now, UTM, which we were just looking at, is free. And I would look at this first for virtualization before you go and buy a commercial package. There are some good commercial software options out there like Parallels, but I think for most folks, UTM is going to be all you need. Let's move on now, though, to gaming. This is an area where the Mac is not as competitive. Hardware-wise, it is very competitive for the price point, but only when games are optimized for the Apple Silicon processor, like the M4 in here. One game that is optimized is one of my favorites, No Man's Sky, and here we were running this at 1080p, but at the highest settings, and we were getting between 45 and 60 frames per second. It was very, very playable, surprisingly so, given that we had the settings cranked up to where they were. And as you can see here, there is a few areas where it'll dip down a little bit lower, which is not unusual for this game. But for hardware at this price point that is essentially entry level, to get more than the basic settings here and getting a playable frame rate from it is quite impressive. This video is being uploaded only at 30 frames per second, so it may not look as smooth as the actual gameplay did to me as I was playing with it here. But as you can see, the visuals look spectacular. The game is very playable, and this is not the typical experience we see with onboard GPUs on many of the Windows-based mini PCs that we look at, both running with Ryzen and Intel processors. Those PCs are no slouches. They are quite powerful in their own right, but not as powerful as this one. The problem, though, is that compatibility is not as universal as it would be on a regular x64-based Windows computer. So, for example, games that are not optimized for this don't run at all or require a lot of shoehorning to get running. So, for example, there are some tools that try to get Windows games shoehorned onto the Mac platform running Apple Silicon. One of those tools is called Whiskey, which is free and open source. I was able to get the Windows Steam client to install. I did get a couple of lower-end games to download and run, and these were Windows games designed for Intel or AMD processors, and they ran great on here, but the higher-end stuff, the AAA titles that you may want to run, don't run, like Red Dead Redemption 2 here. I did give it the old college try. There's another application that is commercially available called Crossover from a company called Codeweavers, and they too have some difficulties getting AAA titles to run on Mac hardware. Again, if you want to run Windows games, a Windows PC is still the best way to do it. Apple is working hard on developing porting tools for developers to get their Windows games over to the Mac with minimal effort. There are some great tools out there for developers, but many are just not taking Apple up on it. So I think it's going to be a while before we can say that the Mac is a gaming platform. We've been waiting for 30 years, but the hardware is here. It's amazing how well this performs. And let's take a look now at a few benchmarks to see exactly how this stacks up against other powerful mini PCs that we look at here. So let's start off with the 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme benchmark test. There we got a score of 9,610 with a frame rate of almost 60 frames per second. That is almost double what we got out of the GM K-Tech K8 NUC box that has a Ryzen 8845HS. And again, the review of that one is coming up later in the week. So tremendously powerful here given the price point, and as you'll see in a minute, the power consumption. Also, we've got the Geekbench benchmark test, and there we got a score of 3,855 on the single core test, 14,938 on the multi-core, and a GPU score of 37,991. And as you can see, that Ryzen 8845HS is competitive here, but still no match for the M4. So we've got a ton of potential that is going untapped on this Apple hardware, at least when it comes to games. Now, under load, the highest power consumption I saw out of the Mac Mini was about 40 watts. When it's idle, it's about 6 watts. So very power efficient for what it's delivering, especially given some of the performance we saw in that game a little while ago. Now, I also ran the 3D Mark Wildlife stress test on this to see how well it handled its performance under load over an extended period of time. There we got a score of 96.7%. Now, normally on those 3D Mark tests, that is a failing grade. 97% is passing, but it's pretty close to the passing mark, and it looks like you're only going to lose about 3 or 4% of its overall performance when it is running under load for an extended period of time. That's another area that really surprised me about this machine. When the fan is running, you don't hear it. I even put my ear up to this thing while we were running benchmarks on it. I couldn't hear any noise at all out of this. The top of the case does get warm to the touch under load, but not hot or alarming in any way. So you will feel it warm up a bit. You'll probably want to keep the area clear around it for the best airflow. And you might want to look underneath here every once in a while to make sure these vents are clear of dust and whatnot, because it is sitting on your desk, sucking in all the air underneath the system here. But again, by and large, no thermal issues to be concerned about, and it just gets a little warm to the touch under load, but most of the time it stays pretty cool and it's quiet all of the time. So there you go. I think Apple has put together a very good value proposition here. This machine, even at its base configuration here, is more than adequate for what most consumers will do with a device like this. I am very impressed to see something like this coming from a name brand where you've got decent support behind it. One only gotcha here is the speed of the internal SSD. This is not going to affect most people, but the 256 gigabyte base model runs a little slower on benchmarks than the 512 gigabyte version will. Now, what you're looking at here is the Blackmagic disk speed test that I ran a little bit earlier. As you can see, its read speeds are 2.8 gigabytes per second. That's fairly quick, no issues there. Some people might find issue with the fact that it can only write at about 1.7 gigabytes per second. That is still more than fine for what most people will do with a computer like this, but it is something to be aware of on the base model here. And although the drive is removable on this, which is a nice thing to see in an Apple product, the drive itself is proprietary, at least for now. There are no third-party replacements you could slide in easily here. But there are plenty of solid-state drives out there that will connect up with the Mac Mini for additional storage if you need it. And because this is a desktop, it's not as clunky to have external storage kicking around. One drive that I like, which came in free of charge through SanDisk a little while back, is their desk drive, which gives you a ton of solid-state storage for not too crazy of a price. This is their 8 terabyte version, and you can just plug this thing in. It doesn't make any noise, and you immediately get a lot more storage. If you hook Thunderbolt drives up to the back, those drives may actually run faster than the internal storage, but you've got a bunch of ports for that purpose there. So that's really the only compromise on the low-end version versus the next step up. But beyond that, I think this is a great mini PC. If you were looking to get into the Mac to see if it's something you might want to try, this price point is a very good entry point. And what you're seeing here is very good performance that you get on these new Apple Silicon chips, thanks to the fact that they put a good amount of RAM on board that will really let you take advantage of what these chips have to offer. So all in, I am very pleased with this, and we'll keep looking at some Windows Mini PCs here over the next couple of weeks as well. That's going to do it for this one. Until next time, this is Lon Seidman. Thanks for watching.